Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of With Sonar. I am Luke Falaska, and I'm joined yet again by my co-host, Kyle Taylor. Kyle, how are you doing today? Thanks for joining me again.
I'm glad to be out.
This is number 3?
This is number 3. We're going on 3 weeks strong. 3 is actually a trend.
3 is a trend.
3 is a trend. You know, 3 is a party, 3 is a trend, and so I'm glad to be back.
We're glad to have you here for that amount of time. Yeah, it is good to get out of the house. So we've been, for folks that have been watching, and you've probably been, if you've been watching the rest of our news, you know this, FreightWaves is remote, apart from like the 6 people that we have here right now in the office, including a couple of folks here doing the cameras and all that. So shout out to Harrison, appreciate you. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, we're only here if it's time to film. Outside of that, everybody else is home, and we're working remote, trying to keep that social distancing.
Yeah.
And it seems like the nation is too.
Yeah. Well, it depends. I've talked to, there's still a couple, I say a couple, there's still a segment of the market out there that's still going into the office.
Sure.
I mean, one of the companies that I'm working with, they brought up if the people loading the trucks have to be there, then sales team's got to be there.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be real. Someone's got to load the trucks. There's drivers that need to be driving the trucks. There's goods that need to get to their final locations.
Yeah, and I think you just hit it. You know, drivers ultimately are really the ones on the front lines right now, right? I mean, you can have drivers and you know, healthcare professional workers and just emergency services. Those folks they're on the road, and there's probably some others there that I'm forgetting, but ultimately, like, there's only so many people that can work remote. At the end of the day, some people are going to have to be there. Freight has to move. Freight never sleeps. Right.
People got to unload the trucks. People forget about those. I mean, drivers are the front lines, but don't forget those. I mean, last week we showed a picture of just a extremely amount of traffic and trailers being backed up. Imagine the 5 workers that have to unload those and are just on the forklift, just going back and forth. I mean, it's
the warehouse workers got to be worked crazy right now.
Yeah,
crazy hours. That's now. Obviously, coronavirus right now is all the buzz, right? It's everywhere. You can't get away from it. We know that. But it seems like the headlines just keep getting worse too. It's not like, hey, we're still talking about it, but things keep getting worse. Have you noticed anything?
Yeah, I mean, well, having Trump come out day after day after day, having a speech daily definitely starts to ramp up. Everyone's kind of has an expectation of what's going to happen coming out of one of these speeches that he has. But we're also looking at what other countries are doing as well. So when you start to see what someone else is doing, it's just like looking at your neighbor. You see what your neighbor's doing, and you're like, all right, well, is that something that we should be doing? I mean, France yesterday came out and brought up that they are requiring that anyone that goes outside of their home have to have a document that says exactly why they're doing it. Hey, I'm going to the grocery store. Like it's like almost like a hall pass that you have to do, and that's something that's being required now. So, I mean, if things still start ramping up that way, I mean, San Francisco, I think, is on a 24 lockdown besides the centrals for the next 2 weeks. So
they're on a lockdown. I think part of New York is. I don't think all of New York, but I think a little piece of New York is. And there are rumors that the U.S. will go to that point. What about there's also a lot of folks that are saying that maybe we're overreacting. I know the UK has not imposed quite as strict limits as most of the other EU has, as well as the U.S.
Yeah.
Is there any feedback that you've heard or anything that you've seen about folks that are just say, are we overreacting?
I think, I mean, I always try to be in the middle.
Sure.
It's always, you try to think of what both sides thinks. I mean, from where we stand, there's people that are saying that Trump should have started testing quicker. We should have started ramping up this production of hospital goods weeks before we did. And then you have others who are saying that, okay, well, I think it's an overreaction. So what do? You try to play the middle.
Sure.
And you can't please everyone, but I think we're trying to do the best we can. But you start talking about the supply of goods to regions of the United States that need it, where the hospitals are. I mean, the Amazon effect of not having to warehouse goods as much as we had to in the past, being that you can always get something 2 days from now, has definitely been a side effect of what we're getting into, these warehouse goods of hospital products.
Yeah.
That's why we're on such a big delay now.
Yeah, I think you made a good point. So the Amazon effect, we've constantly tried to push delivery times faster and faster. We had 2-day shipping. Now we're on 1-day shipping for a lot of prime goods. That's not really a reality right now, or at least it can't be for much longer with the pace that we're showing. We've looked at truckload volume, and it's up almost 25% over the last 3 weeks. That's insane, right?
And it's consecutive. There hasn't been a day of change. It's just been going up.
That's so true. Every single day has gone up, and that's really incredible. And tender rejection are going up. Spot market rates are going up. Wait times are going up, right?
Yeah.
They can only go up for so long. U.S. imports, it looks like, are beginning to recover. They're not as low as they were. We're seeing a little uptick, which is a good sign. That means there might be a little recovery there, because ultimately, if there's no increase in imports, if the ports stay suppressed but truckload volume stays high, we'll deplete all of our warehouses and supplies, and you'll start to see things fall off the cliff. So it's a really good sign that imports are increasing again. We'll see where it ends up, but right now things are really high. To kind of talk on an entertainment perspective for just a moment, Netflix and I guess Google, there's now an extension so you can watch Netflix with people remotely together. So if you and I want to catch up on Vampire Diaries, then we can basically just like install the extension, watch Netflix together. If I pause, it pauses for you. If you pause, it pauses for me. That sort of thing. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean it's actually very interesting. We've been kind of doing that with our team being in the morning. We have all the morning meetings, the afternoon meetings. So I mean, how else? You got to get some interaction with your friends, your family. So how else are you going to do it? You got to get creative, and that's really awesome that now there's an extension with Chrome that you can do.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see what happens, because we're on a nationwide trial right now for working from home. We've seen all these studies come out about working from home is more effective or working from home is less effective, right? And so many companies have tried it. There's a lot of employees that do work from home, but most obviously do not. Right now, we're kind of on a nationwide test run of how productive we can be working from home. I think that's going to be interesting. It'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, people tell me all the time, I mean, I probably heard it 3 times today just on customers and prospects that I've talked to, that they're like, man, must be good to be in the data industry, but also what we talk about is must be good to also be in the CRM, the meeting sharing type of applications, where now, because everyone's working from home, companies had to now download these new apps. They've had to use Zoom, where you can share different meetings and still stay productive. We have Gong. We have all these other different ambitions that we are able to track, what the employee is doing on a day-to-day, because everyone's home.
Right. No, that's a really, really good point. So I think you're going to start to see a boom in a lot of those. A lot of those companies that help folks work from home, like Zoom and Slack and Microsoft Teams and all that good stuff. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. We're using it pretty heavily right now. Let's kind of dive in a little bit. I know a lot of folks have seen things. Before we get to Sonar and looking at some of the data and what's being impacted by the virus, there's been a couple new rounds of layoffs that have surfaced for a few logistics companies. I know TQL. There wasn't an official number, but they said it was between 100 and 500 layoffs today. I think there were a couple others that floated in there, but I mean, it seems kind of odd right now with high volumes and higher rejections. You would think now would be sort of an odd time to do it for logistics.
Yeah, it's now trickling into other industries as well. I actually just got off the phone with a broker who was talking about one of his top customers. One of their plants are shutting down. They're a paper manufacturer.
Oh my goodness.
And so they're already they're now shipping products that they would use to manufacture and distribute the paper. So they're really transplanting the plant to a different location, and they're going to close it down. So not only are we seeing companies lay off people in the logistics industry, but imagine as these warehouses start to deplete their inventory, well, when there's nothing left in the warehouse, what are the workers going to do?
Yeah.
So that's where you go back to the import volumes. You hope that catches up just in time.
Yeah, you really do. And we'll talk in a little bit from now. We'll hear from our economist, Anthony Smith. Before he comes on, though, I want to take a look. Let's go to the Sonar screen if we can, just to show a few things here, to give people a little bit of visibility of what's happening in the market. So right now you can see, so we've got this blue line. This is the outbound tender volume index in the United States. So you can see this number here, this blue line, just massive surge. These two numbers here, the green line is 2019 volume levels, and the orange line is 2018 volume levels. So you can see we are 20 to 25% above where we were this time last year and in 2018. I mean, that's huge. That's what's happening right now, but the imports are down. So I think it's important to see that picture.
It's extremely important.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about capacity constraints. This is hitting it right on the head. You know, these are up-to-date data points that you would need to make better decisions if you are in a logistics company, if you are a carrier. These are the data points you need, because how else are you going to see things unless you're just hearing it on the phone? You know, the old labor costs, you know, okay, what's the opportunity cost here of like, okay, 5 calls later, well, it looks like it's now $5 a mile to run this truck. I saw Chad Boblet on Rate Per Mile Masters on Facebook. He posted something yesterday, and it was a video of another warehouse, and it was just trailers on both sides in the intersection, and they were, you know, trucks were shutting down, and so they were saying, you know, that he was like, this is the reason why I denied I think it was $4.15 load per mile. So if carriers are rejecting those kinds of loads, I mean, rates are going to go up. Volumes aren't going anywhere.
No, they aren't.
So,
no, that's so true. And this number gets affected differently in different parts of the country, just because it's. I mean, like there's some areas that are way higher than this, some not as much. Let's take a look at the next number too. This right here are tender rejections. So as you know, as tender rejections go up, spot market rates go up along with it, and carriers and shippers have a harder time covering their freight. We've got every major mode of transportation. So you've got in blue dry van tender rejections, a little over 12.5%, massive surge. That's up almost 3x since the beginning of the month. Yep. Reefer just shot up there. That's that green line. It was fairly flat and just pretty much turned up overnight. So again, something you need to take into account. And all this can be broken down by market and by lane as well. And then flatbed here is the orange. That's been fairly level, little bit of a pump up a little bit there last week of February, but for the most part, nowhere near the volatility that the other two are seeing.
Yeah, it's actually very interesting, because today seems to be the day that I talk to, you know, companies that seem to relate to the most with what's going on in the market. One of my customers brought up that they work with a major poultry distributor, and they normally get 4 loads a week is what they negotiated, and they sent over 12 this week. And, and so, I mean, it's there. The volumes are surging. You can't get meats at the grocery stores. Did get a lot of good meat at the butcher right down on Main Street though.
Oh, they got good stuff.
You could definitely, if you know where to look, you could definitely find some meats.
If you're ever in Chattanooga, Tennessee, Main Street Meats, very, very good deli.
Yeah.
Very, very good. Excellent. Now, we're gonna, I think, because we've been talking about the imports a little bit. So what we've got here is this right here is the U.S. Customs imports. So these are ocean imports in the U.S. And we saw we're typically around 50,000 imports a day, plus or minus. Sometimes around 40 to 50,000 is the range, right, depending on the day. And we just fell off a cliff in the early February. Looks like we hit bottom around the first week towards the end of the first week of March, and we're upticked a little bit.
Yep.
Not a lot, but a little bit. That's a good sign.
Back up and running. I mean, I would love to. I'm no maritime expert here. I'll tell you. I'll be the first person to tell you that. But that's definitely China coming back up on and back in production. But you think if they're back in production, it still takes week to 2 weeks for those containers to get here. So maybe that's the offloading of ships, the stockpiling of containers that were built up at these ports. So now we're finally seeing those really start to come out and be distributed to the market.
Absolutely, yeah. So we'll keep an eye on that and see how that changes day to day. I think next step, though, is we're going to bring in our chief economist, Anthony Smith, and he's going to kind of walk us through some of these things, because there are going to be some big economic impacts on what the coronavirus is having on the economy and on freight. So please welcome Anthony Smith, everybody. Yes.
There he is. You can have a seat, too.
We got only about 4 people here. to clap you in since everybody else is home.
I'll take
but
it.
thank you for joining us today.
I'll take it.
I know we're not supposed to touch hands, so everybody wash your hands afterwards.
We already touched hands.
Yeah. Bumping over here.
Bubbles, there we go. Okay, perfect. Anthony, thank you for joining us today. Man, you've had a day of media. You've been all over the FreightWaves TV today.
Yeah. It's been a fun time here. We're with the skeleton media crew.
Yeah.
Trying to keep people up to date as best as we can, but big shout out to everyone behind the scenes.
That's so true.
Especially the interns, Emila, Howard, and all those guys. Harrison, Jimmy, Jonathan, Emily Zhang doing a great job of really coordinating things and really getting the content out there when it really means the most.
That's a good point. They're the unsung heroes of all this.
Mm-hmm.
True. Really, media folks everywhere, especially here, helping us put this production on when everything's going on. So, give them a shout out in the comments, folks. Anthony, so there's all this talk right now. Obviously, we know the freight market's in a tizzy, right?
Yeah.
Some things are going way up, some things are going way down, some things look like they're recovering, we're not quite sure yet. But the biggest talk right now is there going to be a recession? I've heard a lot of people they're throwing out like, oh, we're already in a recession or we're about to be. And I know you've done this before, but can you just like remind folks what a recession actually is first before we kind of start throwing out buzzwords?
Yeah. Typically, the accepted definition of recession is consecutive quarters of decline or contraction.
Yeah.
So in order for us to be in a recession right now, people are probably saying that we're in the first quarter of contraction.
Sure.
And everyone could probably see that the second quarter is going to be substantially low.
Yep.
And so they're probably saying, all right, this is the first quarter of the recession. Quarter two is going to be another contraction and potentially quarter three. So a lot of people are looking at least 9 months of just cyclical decline here.
Yep.
I think there is a slight chance that we could be seeing the early parts of a recession, but the big takeaway is that the driving force behind the economy is the consumer.
Right.
And so what we're seeing is that the consumer segments have been in a decent place up until the last few weeks here. Although we did see that retail sales numbers weren't the most stellar in February, I think one of the things that we do see is a lot of the panic buying that's happened as of late. What we saw is that there has been a huge run up and something that you guys chatted to earlier with volumes, refrigerated tender rejections. There's been a lot of activity on people buying goods, really kind of refurbishing supplies, things like that. So there could be that boost that might come from that segment, a lot of those goods being pulled forward.
Yeah.
But there's also going to be a substantial decline in things like shopping malls, which was already on the way down on a trend overall, but now that we're seeing shopping centers really shutter all operations for the next few weeks, that's really going to start to weigh on third quarter results as well.
Yeah. We saw a lot of major retailers shut their doors nationwide. Macy's, they just shut their doors nationwide. And they're not alone. There's a few others that have been there along with it. That's a lot of truckload volume.
A lot, yeah. It's a lot of truckload volume. I think the big part, we also see that Amazon is looking to hire, I think, was it about 100,000
folks?
Yep.
Yeah, that's a big number.
Yeah, so I think this is something that is going to be, we already saw that department stores and in-person retails were kind of on the way out.
Right.
So this could just be that kick that really is going to be hard to come back from when you're seeing them having to shut their operations down for such a substantial amount of time, trying to ramp operations back up. And even after, I think, some of this pandemonium dies down, I mean, I think the biggest thing that's going to be the biggest sticking point is going to be the psychology of it all, right? So even far after the pandemic and everything really subsides, coronavirus dies down, I think the psychology is still going to be lingering well after the fact. And so I think we're going to see people still a little bit hesitant potentially to go out and shopping around and still being around in large populations, large gatherings, far after the virus even subsides.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good point. So like you said, everything's driven by the consumer, and if they're not out there spending, then we could be in a tough spot. Let's go ahead and show the Sonar chart here real quick on the screen to give a visual of something that Anthony is talking about. So this right here, Anthony, this is, I think we've got about the last 6 months here on the screen. We can change the view, but for those viewing, the blue line is retail sales year-over-year change. And that's here, that's this blue line. And then so last update is end of February, so we don't have March's numbers yet. We'll get March here in a few weeks. And then the green line is outbound tender rejections along with that. So they actually track fairly closely.
Yeah, and that's really going to be, I think, the telltale sign of how the third quarter ends.
Yeah.
There is some slight chance that, you know, the consumer activity over the last couple of weeks could really kind of push things over the edge just for eking out some type of growth, but that's going to be very difficult, especially with manufacturing that's probably going to really significantly contract here in March, although industrial production did have a decent showing in February. So I think we're monitoring consumer activity, we're monitoring what's going on that side of the economy. Retail sales is going to be telling. I expect to see a substantial or a steady trend in e-commerce and online retailer sales, especially as some of these brick and mortar traditional stores really lean heavily on their online operations.
Sure. So now Kyle and I, we were talking a little bit ago, while the retail stores and the brick and mortars, they're closing their doors, but somebody still has to load the truck.
Yeah.
What do we ever see, and we probably don't have the answer, but what type of economic impact would we see if, say, we were forced to be on lockdown and there was no trucks moving apart from, say, like, you know, absolutely necessary goods like food and medicine, that sort of thing?
Oh yeah, I mean, that would be
that could be
horrific.
disastrous.
Oh, horrific, especially when you're looking at the thing that matters the most now. The industry that really should be having the most attention to it is going to be the medical field. And so if we're starting to see any kind of disruption in those medical supplies being distributed or coming in and out, that can really kind of wreak havoc throughout the nation. And so that's really a huge, I think spotlight should be shined on those folks that are in transportation, those drivers, those folks that are loading those trucks, and really making sure that the supply chain is still moving. And so even though I think people have been impacted, if you can, you know, go to grocery stores to see the kind of impact people have had, you can see people being laid off, or maybe they're not able to go into work or report because they can't work remotely, they can't cut hair remotely, they can't treat patients, go to the dentist remotely. So all these things that can't be done remotely, they're staying in. And so things are bad, but things could be a lot worse given the impact that those drivers have in the supply chain.
Now, obviously, we're all talking here, but we're all consumers as well, right? I mean, we buy things. What are things that you guys are buying right now? As we're kind of in this state, what's the last thing everybody here bought?
Right, well, we were talking about caffeine. That was the one thing that I wanted to make sure that stores shut down, coffee shops closed down. I'm going to be out of coffee. You're going to have an angry guy. You know, this is kind of what we were talking about.
He's a great guy.
That's what we were talking about before we got on. I was like, my Amazon purchase came in. We're going to be okay for a month.
For me, I am slightly irresponsible when it comes to my culinary practices. So last thing I purchased was Chipotle, Postmates, because delivery is still an option. But I really need to probably
stock up a little bit.
Maybe get some cans of tuna, you know?
And
revert to my old college ways of just tuna, salmon, ramen, all that good stuff.
It's good for you. Mine's the ramen part.
There's two options.
That's good for the soul.
Right.
You're either going to get extremely lean, or we're going to go in the opposite direction. I'm going to eat all the snacks. You know?
One of the two.
We'll beef up for a little bit, and then kind of as like the supply, you know, cuts down a little bit, then we'll lose it all again.
One thing that you brought up that I wanted to kind of get your opinion on, which was, you know, you kind of brought up, you know, what happened. What's going to be an economic driver of if these warehouses close down, if drivers can't go in there. I think the actual next step that we're starting to see is that limited hours on these warehouses. I think there's going to be less people working. So when you start seeing that, what do you feel is going to happen if there's only a certain amount of hours, or let's say social distancing? Clearly, we're not doing the 6-foot rule, but if there's only going to be 5, people working today because they're trying to limit the amount of people that could potentially get affected.
Yeah, so I think with that, I think efficiency is going to be key, and I think that's really going to be the one of the things that you spoke about when we first got here is like this big social experiment of working from home. I think the other social big experiment is going to be efficiency, and I think potentially even on our way out, that's going to be a talking point, especially when we're looking at the recovery. Yeah. Maybe we need to get rid of some of those regulations when we look at recovery, eliminate some potential overtimes because we're going to need steady ramp-ups, especially when we're looking at the medical field.
Yeah, because I saw Target was limiting their hours. I think Publix was limiting their hours. So I'm curious. I don't know the full aspects of their limit on hours. Could it be just for the consumer? Or I know they were wanting to ramp up their time to clean the stores and be able to restock the stores appropriately.
Right.
But if they're limiting the total hours, because if we're starting to limit how many people that can go out in the day. I still need to go to Publix. I should probably go to Publix today.
Right.
Probably should go today. Folks, this has been a great conversation. I'm glad we have it, and I think we could probably talk for a lot longer. Unfortunately, we are low on time, and we have to keep the show rolling on schedule. So we're going to have to cut it there, but guess what? We will be back next week. If you like Sonar and you want to see more and you want to take advantage of this, volatility can be your friend in the freight market, okay? And Sonar can help you take advantage of that to profit. Don't put yourself in a position where you have to lay people off, or at least avoid it as best you're able. Let Sonar give you the tools that you need to be more successful. Scan the QR code in the bottom right corner. It will get you a demo. Leave us a comment below if you have interest or questions. We'll be in the comments after the show is done. And again, I'm Luke Velasquez. Thanks for tuning in to With Sonar. We will see you next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Have a fantastic evening. Be safe. Be healthy. Take care.